Yeah, we're live. It is 6:52. I'm a little bit early for the 7 o'clock show, and we're doing things a little differently. We're going back to the OG. This is the regular way that we've been doing the live feeds for YouTube. But I wanted to put the thumbnail up, and the thumbnail that I have up is when we were, I think, just getting back to for COVID, and we could do testing or whatever. And I think that's what that was about. But at any rate, we had two TorqueStorm superchargers that we ran on an LS. And this begs the question, and it's a very, very common question because I get this all the time, particularly when we do and we get this for turbos, not as much for superchargers, but it still kind of holds true. And the question is, should I run twins? On turbos, it's very common. Hey, which one makes more power? And then which one's more responsive? Is two smaller turbos more responsive than two bigger, one bigger turbo, all of that. So we want to talk about that. We want to talk about when twins are good, which is obviously always, but we want to talk about when twins are good, and then when you would use them for each of these. You've seen, no doubt, the guys have seen the guy that's driving around that has all of the blowers, all the roots blowers stacked on top of each other. I don't know if any of those are all, I don't know if all of them are all operational or not, probably not, but that is really, really cool looking. And so that's the reason why you would do that. Otherwise, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't compound one inefficient blower on top of another inefficient blower. That would really not be the way to do it. That's why it's so popular when you're doing a compound setup with twin things, whatever they are. When you're doing one kind of forced induction going into the other one, you want to have ones that are efficient, like, let's say, at different operating ranges. So a roots blower, really good down low and immediate boost response, all of that's good. Not very good at elevated boost pressures. And, you could argue that maybe not for RPM. I don't think that that's really a thing for the RPM thing, but you could make it better with, and turbos are really good. Not as good as lighting off immediately, unless we size the turbo really small. But so they complement each other. So if you have one that's really good down low and then you can get the turbos to come on and work really good, then all that's good stuff. So running twins like that of two different kinds of things obviously works. But when you're running two blowers, let's say like we show on the two TorqueStorms, the reason that you do that is not so much for an improved response rate, although you would see that by default, not really by design. What I mean by that is on a centrifugal supercharger, this one's a TorqueStorm, could be a Vortec, which they got good stuff, ProCharger. If you look at those types of superchargers, what they do is, if you think about it as a turbo impeller, but driven mechanically, that's what they are. And so instead of relying on exhaust energy, which they can to get spooled up and make power, and then, once you get this thing like feeding more intake pressure or boost into the motor, and it makes more power, and that's more exhaust, and that spins the exhaust faster, and that spins the compressor faster, and then they get self-sustaining. That can work out very fast. A centrifugal blower doesn't have that. It just has engine speed. It's mechanically coupled. It's spinning an impeller. So it really doesn't get going until the very top of the RPM range. Now, obviously, you can pulley it to have things happen a little bit earlier, but still, in every instance, it is going to make less boost down low than it does up top. Guys have now done things where they, guys have been talking for a long time, and this has been done for a long time, where they speed them up and then level the boost off with a blow-off valve or a wastegate. Or now guys are doing it with electric motors, where they spin that supercharger up with an electric motor. But honestly, all you're doing is outsourcing some of the drive. You don't have to drive that electric motor. And if you're trying to do that with an alternator assembly, a typical 12 volt or even a 16 volt system, it's just not a good kind of trade-off. Could work for a drag race application or something like that, but just the amount of power that's required to drive a blower that's going to support, pick your number, 500 to 1,000 horsepower, whatever it's going to support, is a lot. It takes a lot to drive that. And so even outsourcing it electronically or with an electric motor, still you have to have the power from somewhere. So that also does work. But in the case of a centrifugal supercharger like this TorqueStorm, like we're showing on the thumbnail, you drive that with a belt, which in this case we have two of them. One, because we have a crank pulley with two drive assemblies on it, and then one's driving one, one's driving the other. And then what happens is, like I said, with a centrifugal blower, less boost. You might only have 2 or 3 pounds or whatever down low. And then as it rises with engine speed, depending on how much engine speed you have and what blower you have, how fast you're spinning it, what the pulley ratio is, all of those things, maybe you start off at 2 and you end up with 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever it is. Now, if you add a second blower to that, and, if you're just running one, it does that. If you're adding a second blower to that, you're not going to improve the response rate of either one of the blowers. They're still going to do what they do. But what you've done now is add another set of things or thing that's also going to have 2 pounds of boost down low and then 15 pounds of boost or whatever at the top, 10 or 15 pounds boost, how much ever it has. What happens then is you'll have more boost down low now because you have 2 things providing that much airflow. And so what happens is we just see that as more boost. And then you see it as more boost everywhere. So they're just going to add a bunch more airflow because now there's 2 of them. So you have twice the airflow essentially. And so now you're going to have more boost pressure. You're going to have more power. It's all going to be good. So the thing that 2 of those centrifugal blowers does, what that does, like as shown in that thumbnail where we're running 2 torque storms on an LS motor, is it gives you more ultimate power potential. One of them will support a given amount of power, 700, 800 horsepower, whatever it is. And so now 2 of them will do double that. And that's good. That's nice. And like I said, the byproduct of that is that you don't necessarily improve the response rate because you haven't really changed the fundamental nature of a centrifugal supercharger. You just have more of it. It's kind of like adding a much bigger one. So you've added 2 of them, and that helps. It's kind of cool because now, like I said, particularly with the original Torque Storm stuff, which was not a real high power blower, but having 2 of them is cool. Plus, let's face it, if you have 2 of them, you have a twin supercharged deal or a twin turbo or whatever. It's just cooler. I mean, it's more symmetrical. It looks better. It makes a better statement. Plus, you could say, hey, it's not just supercharged, it's twin supercharged, which makes it obviously even better. And so you can get more power, a little bit more response. Although, like I said, you haven't fundamentally changed the design of the blower, but because you have more of it, you can get more power down low and more power in the middle and more power at the top. All of that. This is different than the turbo stuff. Now, it works the same. I guess the difference that's going to happen with a turbo stuff is that there's 2 things that we need to consider with a turbo. First of all, if you're running twins and they're small, and then you run a single that's bigger, and they both can support the same amount of power, you could argue that if you size them correctly, they just do the same thing. If you had a 700 horsepower single turbo or 2 350 horsepower turbos, that essentially they're going to do the same thing because the twins are, each one of them is driven off half of the motor. And then it's providing boost. They join together and provide the boost into it. And then they can support 700 horsepower. Same thing with the one single, although with the one single, you have both sides of the motor feeding it. And maybe they get different pulsing and, guys can go into the esoteric stuff. But you have half of the exhaust energy feeding one, and then you have all the exhaust energy feeding the other. You could make them do the same thing. But we can also have the same situation that we have with centrifugal blowers or any kind of blower, really, if we have twins. If you have 2 big turbos and now you don't have 2 300 horsepower turbos, now you have 2 500 horsepower turbos or 2 800 horsepower turbos. Now you have the ability to, you just get 2 of them. If you got 2 800s, you got 1600, and that's how much power you can make. So you can do that same thing with turbos. The difference being that unlike the centrifugal supercharger, when you're doing that, you're not getting more power down low because the problem is you haven't just added another one to it. You haven't taken the single one and then added another one to it because you now have halved the exhaust energy. If you had a single 800 horsepower turbo and you added a second 800 horsepower turbo, now you have 1600 horsepower with the turbos, but you only have half the exhaust energy feeding each one. So it's not going to do the same thing, the same positive thing that we saw with the centrifugal blowers where we added boost down low because we just added another blower with no downside. And on the turbo setup, if we put another 800 horsepower turbo on there, we have a downside of not feeding it enough exhaust energy until they start to catch up and get happy and stuff. And so that setup would be a lot more laggy than it would with just a single turbo. That's kind of to be expected anyway. If we're going from wanting to make 800 horsepower to 1600 horsepower, there's almost no way for all of that to happen without the thing being softer down low. Because it's like having a bigger cam or short runner intake manifold. We've shifted power production, and that's not unusual. If you're a guy wanting to make 1600 horsepower, it's a different guy than a guy wanting to make only 800 horsepower. They're going to have different goals and different combinations, and they're going to be using it for different things. And so that's not unusual. The 1600 horsepower guy might have a two-step, or a quick spool valve or something like that, or a big stall converter or whatever he needs to utilize that. And he might be running different gearing and more RPM range and, all of that stuff. But it's important to note that, like I said, they are different and you have to understand these. But when you're choosing them, you can't just, hey, look, I just want 2 turbos. This is on the turbo side, this is a really common question that I get with the GT45 turbos that I've recommended forever, which I'm about to change my tune on because we found something that's better. But on the GT45 turbos, you get one that's like let's say 750, whatever the peak number is. You can make that kind of power, and people are like, okay, well, good, I'm just gonna run 2 of them. Well, that's great. And they only want to make 900 or 1,000 horsepower. I'm like, yeah, that's a terrible idea. You got 1,500 horsepower with the turbos. You have a turbo that's already kind of, let's be honest, it's already kind of a laggy design anyways. And now you're putting 2 of them on it and you're not utilizing all of it. If you're utilizing all of it and you wanted to make 1,500 horsepower, which those 2 turbos will support, if you want to do that, then yeah, by all means do that. But if you're only wanting to make 1,000, then pick better turbos that will get you to 1,000 and be, more responsive. And it just would just be a better package all the way. So just adding the other one in terms of the turbos, not always the beneficial thing to do, like I said, because we're having to half the exhaust energy. And that just means softer spool rate. Let's see what you guys got going on tonight. Darren. Untrue, my vet head life. What's going on, man? Did you send me an email to ask me the things that you wanted to ask me? You're the man. Compound setup. Yep. All that's good. Single. Tri-City Twins. There you go. Earth is good for this kind of content. Are other planets good as well? Did they listen? I know that I'm international, but I don't know if I'm interstellar. I was thinking a small turbo, faster response, feeding the larger one. I'm thinking of adding a 103 millimeter throttle body to my LS3 with twin 6266s. Need someone to talk me out of trying it, looking for throttle response. That's not going to do anything. What you'll get is with a bigger throttle body, you could get the setup to feel touchier because of the opening rate of the bigger throttle body. But it's not going to do anything if the turbos ultimately decide how they come up. The throttle size is not going to do that. And it's not going to add any power either because you're blowing through, I'm assuming on an LS3, a 92 millimeter or 90 millimeter throttle body. That's not holding back your power at all. So I hope we've talked you out of it. Non-displacement superchargers have their own boost curve. And so which superchargers are you talking about? What about running twin turbo and blower? The boost curve supplied by any form of forced induction is going to be a function of that thing itself, but also a big function of the NA motor that you're putting it on. What about running twin turbo and a blower? Yes, we've done that before. We did that on the 03 Cobra. Has you ever run a big 4-cylinder like a K24 and then ran 2 very tiny turbos just to mess around and see what's holding times and stuff like that? So you want to run a twin on a K24? If you could size them small enough for what you're trying to do, that's certainly possible. I've run lots of turbo stuff on K24s. What they need is a centrifugal blower with a CVT transmission. There you go. Twins over single if it's a choice. Smoothing time. The old Honda gearbox. LY6 with a Chupacabra. How much horsepower? Probably high 400s, I'm thinking. Love my 6266 on my LS3. I was thinking an axial compressor feeding into a centrifugal compressor would have some advantages. In aviation, they use as an auxiliary power unit. I've only seen a couple axial superchargers that they tried to do. Latham tried to do them for automotive applications. Has anyone driven a centrifugal with a variable snowmobile clutch setup? Torque storms into twin M90s. There you go. Let's just overcomplicate everything. That would be awesome. But it would look good, though. It would look very Pro Street. I just purchased another Gen 3 5.3 for $100. Nice. But the guy said it spun a bearing. What are the chances, or what's more common to go first, the main or the rod bearing? Well, it doesn't matter if it's spun a bearing. You have to check all of them anyways. They're all going to have material in them. Once one goes, you're going to get material deposited in all the bearings. Never seen successful ground level axial blowers. Yeah, I don't think that the Latham was I only ever remember seeing one test that the magazines did with one of those. And I think it worked okay. It was way back. I like my Kia Spectra with a VF39 turbo sticking all the way out of the hood. There you go. Just got emissions testing done today. One step closer. Did it pass, Shadow Ops? Richard, I have an LQ4 that I bought 706 heads for. I'm running an LS6 intake. Okay. Wondering if your cam reduce 400 to the wheels. No, I don't think it will. And certainly not on that combination. That combination is not going to be making 500 flywheel horsepower. Same story with a 2002 Hyundai Accent. How much load would two approachers put on the crank snout? I think quite a bit. I mean, I think that's why they drive them off the snout of the crank. And when they do that, when you have blower crankshafts, they're usually double keyed, and usually they're big snouted. if that's a technical term. One step closer to finally having tags. Past smog. There you go. Andrew, your Kia Spectra is a turbo diesel? Getting closer each day, harder than I'm used to because car is low. How low can you go? Supercharge the low end boost, crank clutch, turbo the high boost RPM, Lancia Delta. I'm sure how it works. Dual charge. Yeah, we've done twin charge stuff a lot. What turbo do you now like better than the GT45? One of the ones that we just tested. I got busy. Okay, no problem. I just want to make sure I'm not rushing you. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss it. Thoughts on centrifugal setups. That's what the thumbnail is for this. That's what started all this discussion. I've learned a lot from you. I'm in the process of downsizing turbos to try to find the Goldilocks. I avoided having to swap my transmission. I'm running twin 69 Borg Warner turbos on an LQ9, a 408 stroker. Spool speed isn't too bad. Probably wouldn't. Well, the 69, it depends on which 69. It depends on what wheels they have on them and what the hot side is. But on a 408 stroker, the nice thing about that is having the extra displacement certainly adds to, it improves boost response. I have a spare junk on-3 turbo in the basement, still trying to keep it single and simple. You're really making me think about putting twin turbos on my 408. About what size should you go with for 1300 at the tire, and how hard to mount at the end of the headers. What is the collector size on the headers? Drag van. Richard, what brands are reliable wastegates and blow-off valves? It seemed DS Racing was cheap, but I wasn't sure. I haven't tried their stuff. I think Matt has tried their stuff a lot. I think he likes their stuff. If their turbos are any indication, I like their turbo stuff. I tend to use the Turbo Smart stuff only because it's already there and they gave it to me. So, you know, I try to take care of those guys. Really, for me, it's more of a convenience thing than anything. It's already there on the, I think I have 3 of them. So I have 2 of them on the, whether we're running singles or twins, we always run 2 of those wastegates. And they're usually enough for what we're doing. Do the twin centrifugals have a liners draw on parasitic loss? Or in other words, is there a greater proportion of loss to gains from in horsepower, or is there a greater proportion of horsepower versus loss? The parasitic loss associated with driving that centrifugal supercharger, they're going to be fixed. But the loss is going to also is a function of many things. It's a function of the blower, the size, that particular unit, but then also the speed that you're driving it at, and also the amount of airflow that the blower is processing, and then also the boost that you're having to have it supercharge against. So the resistance, basically. So all of that stuff will combine to make some sort of parasitic loss curve. What will happen if you put 2 of them together, the boost pressure is going to be higher. So the flow rate of each one is probably going to go down, but the boost pressure is going to go up. I mean, relative to running just one. If you run a different size pulley on, what if you run a different size pulley on each supercharger? I don't know why you would do that. Wonder if an Atlas 2900 will fit in a car. What's the new go-to turbo in place of the GT? We can't release that yet. Can't release that until they're ready. Torque storm feeding a Whipple. That would be. Yeah, I don't know why. I've had people ask me about that. I just think that that's a terrible idea. I don't know why you'd have a centrifugal feeding a positive displacement blower. Have you thought about a high school with automotive technology? I'm in unmarked waters here. I'm trying to decide at 228, 234, or 232, 236 at 50, both around 450 lift for a G10, looking to peak around 8,500. Currently working on the intake. I honestly don't see, given, well, it is only 3 cylinders and not 4 cylinders, but still, I don't see why, given that displacement, a 228 cam like on a B16 or a B18 will make power at 8,000 or above. But they have really good 4-valve heads on there, and that's the kind of thing that's limiting you. Any tests come with Frankenstein heads? I don't have a motor that could utilize heads like that. You've seen a 292 inline Chevy put down 1,300 on a hub dial. I have not seen that. I know that the guys do crazy stuff down in Puerto Rico with those. Frank, the Turbo Smart stuff is not going to be inexpensive, though. Is the Trailblazer SS intake the same as the new body style? I think so. I haven't had them sitting next to each other. Not the rec port one, but I think that there's another new body style cathedral port one that should be the same as the Trailblazer SS. TBSS shaved ported intake versus L6 intake manifold. 5.3 twin turbo, better intake for balance, higher top end with dig, low end, takeoff. So you want an intake that does everything. A Trailblazer SS makes more power than an LS6 intake manifold does. I don't know about the porting that you're doing, so I don't know what that entails. But you don't have to worry about intake manifolds on your twin turbo setup. That's not going to, and I thought that you were blowing through a blower or something, so that's not going to make any difference. But on a twin turbo setup, the turbos are going to dictate the power, not your intake manifold. Either one of those will allow you to make how much ever turbo you put on there will be fine. I have a question about twin turbos for response on my 03 Navigator. I'm going for 800 horsepower. Okay. Just got my scrolling. Just got my 5.3 truck Norris cam motor, 600 vacuum secondary carb, LS controller, and it falls on its face when I mash on it. Tried different adjustments and nothing's working. And your recommendation? Yeah, you gotta you need to tell me what's happening to the air fuel when that happens, and or what's happening to the timing when that happens. Since I don't know about what's going on with either one, I don't know which way to fix that. The timing on a MSD controller, as long as you don't have it hooked up to a map signal where you just have basically a distributor curve in this thing, if it goes up to a peak of, let's say 30 degrees, that's going to be really, really close. And then it has a little bit less, at idle and stuff. If you're stepping on the gas and the thing bogs or whatever, maybe it's trying to open the secondaries too soon. Maybe it's not opening them at all. Maybe you have a bad squirter. Maybe you have a bad cam on the side that's determining how that thing gets injected. I mean, there's lots of things to look at. How much would a 6-liter Gen 3 with Gen 4 rod handle with ring gap? Well, we've done 1,500 with something like that, so you could do a lot. That motor will handle all of what a 78, 75 turbo will do. Also, acceleration out of corner. Yeah, you're going to be under tired and overpowered. That's not going to be a problem. I fell behind to the Trophy 4. We haven't run it yet. Gen 444 stock 110 cc heads. What stock head was 110 cc's? Was it an early closed chamber head? 206 172. That sounds like an oval port deal. 252 duration. Oh, okay, that's the advertised duration. 206. What would be horsepower and power band? I don't know what heads those are. You got to tell me what heads they are. I'm assuming it's, and you also got to tell me what intake manifold it is. But a 206 camshaft is just going to make a lot of torque and not very much horsepower. I would kind of be surprised if you made 1 horsepower per cubic inch with that camshaft. 3-inch collectors, 3-inch exhaust, long tube headers. Okay. I want the turbos down low next to the transmission and have an intercooler and ice water. Okay. 3-inch will be fine because the inlet of that's going to work out okay. You would feed another supercharger to see top end results. Yeah, like I said, I don't think that a centrifugal and a roots blower are a really good combination. The guys from Vortec did that with way back doing that. I think they did it on a Lightning. I've never run Ace's stuff. You don't have a 6-bolt LS block? No, I have none of those. Thank you for your answer earlier. Again, LQ4, 706 heads, L6 intake mat. What cam should I run to have around 400 wheel horsepower? I don't think you're going to get there. You'd have to run a big cam to do that. You have to run like that comp 469 cam or a BTR red hot cam, or maybe even their LS3 stage 4 cam. And I don't know how drivable you want it. Your problem is you're limiting it with cylinder heads. You need more head flow. And I don't know what intake you have on there. Oh, LS6 intake manifold. Okay, that's not bad, but you need to make 500 flywheel. And if you take a look at the test that I have up, I think that the 706 headed one with the 469 cam, I want to say that made like low 500s. So 706 heads and a 459 cam. Oh yeah, so it made 513. So you can make 400 wheel horsepower with that. But that was an LY6, 706 heads, a Dorman LS2 intake manifold, which is the equivalent of a Trailblazer SS. The cam was a comp of 54 459-11, which is a 617, 624, 231, 239, and a 114. There are other cams that will also do that, but it would really respond to more head flow. Turbo 6-liter wouldn't rev past 5,500. Found out harmonic balancer almost fell off. Would pin it if I would go back. Yeah, but I don't know why the balancer. Why would the balancer stop it from revving? What was going on? Oh, that was asking for another question. Any idea how much horsepower could be made with two M90s? Well, we've made. Well, you know how much we've made. We've made six something with one of them. So it's set on HO truck with 93. Yeah, Dave, I don't go by I don't use the ignition curves that they have, because their ignition curves that they have set in there have like 36 degrees, and no LS wants that much timing. Have you tested a twin charge LS? Reference title. I want to go back and look. I don't think on the LS. We did that on an 03 Cobra. We did that on I did a compound turbo on a LS. And then we did the compound turbo blower on the 3800 V6. D16 heads flow 45 CFM more. Yeah, and these are on a B series, which is even better. Can you advise me on a homemade hot tank setup? Can anybody help my vet head life on a hot tank setup? Richard, if I stick with 93 octane with a turbo, would you lower the timing down to 20 through the power band on my 5.3? I think at 93, it's going to be lower than that, depending on what the boost is. Any thoughts on sleeving the LS3? You have a different question than that. Are you asking if it will work? I have sleeved LS aluminum blocks with Dart and stuff, and it works really good. We made a 468 with one. My truck damper needed 37 foot-pounds, then 240 foot-pounds, then 140 degrees of torque. I got it to 150. There you go. It's a lot. It's like I think I'm going to snap this bolt tight. I'm really glad about the heavy-duty rotating assembly that can handle 1,500 horsepower. I think the weak spot will be the block. Thoughts on the new Holley Smellbuck Chevy high rams? Everybody's throwing those out there. I don't know. I've never tested one, but it should be good. It should be better than their stealth ram, I think. Can you make some videos about a 612 box tuning and timing curve? But there's not really much to do for those. If you just put a timing curve in that has 30 degrees at the peak and like 10 or 12 degrees at idle, and you just draw a line in there, it's going to be fine. In fact, most people, what they do with those things, they just put all the timing in after like 4,000 or 4,500. I don't do that because the motor doesn't really need that. But if you look at an old carbureted motor, that's what they were. All the timing was full in, usually by 3,000 RPM, certainly 3,500. It was all in. It would do all of what the distributor would do. And so you could do the same thing with that. There really isn't a lot of tuning other than you don't want to go too far. Like you don't want to have 36 degrees. You want to have 30 maximum. What's the max horsepower that would work with stock mains with a 6-bolt main? Like the most I've ever done on a stock bottom end from the wrecking yard is over 1,500 horsepower. That's stock everything on the bottom side. All we did was change the ring gap. So the stock high mileage block, crank, rods, pistons, and rings, we just cut the rings so we had more ring gap in it and put it back together. And that was with the stock bolts and all that. Oval port head, 78, 75 turbo, seems making around 600, trying to have a lot of flow of low-end torque for off-roading. If I'm not mistaken, the iron block is good to 1500. I believe in aftermarkets needed beyond 1500. We need to tune an LS controller with a truck Norris cam. I'm still dealing with teething issues on that. Just time and money. 12, 13 degrees to 30. Yep. Tim, I did tell Jimmy to list the intakes. I think we were waiting to get one because somebody had brought up that some of the aftermarket ones have a straight injector port and not an angled injector port like factory ones do. And so I wanted to look at that and make sure that that wasn't the case. Probably just going to start with a small spring first and run 6 pounds of boost on the 5.3. I've heard people running 15 degrees tuning and some people saying that's more. That's why I'm here to learn. Yeah, I don't do a lot of pump gas stuff, so I'm not that guy. But I know Matt, it does a lot of that. And he said 14 degrees of timing is 14 pounds of boost is kind of works on pump gas, particularly 93. But you have to make sure that it works and that it doesn't detonate. Just wanted to say thanks for all the answers. I'm happy to help, as always. Yeah, 6 pounds won't be a problem. 6 pounds and 15 degrees. It probably will be closer to 20 on 6 pounds, as long as you have it intercooled. The weight of the vehicle is going to be a factor, yeah, because the load that you're putting on it, and the gearing and the converter and all that. Drag bands out. Yo, I'm out. We out. Yeah, the twin torque storm thing looked pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with that. And I've used those torque storms for a lot of stuff. We're going to run them on the Pontiac for too long here. It's front wheel drive to make sure it stays on the road. Yeah, I don't think you need that. You're going to have trouble with lots of stuff there. Do you have the transmission for that, Frank? Richard, not taking springs into consideration. What's the max lift and duration for stock L-Cube4? It's not, has nothing to do with lift. If you're talking about piston to valve clearance, it's all duration. And it depends on the actual valve events on what's going on. But somewhere in the mid 230s at 50 on the intake, the exhaust can go to 248 or something. That's not usually an issue. But somewhere in the mid 230s. But again, depending on what the LSA is and when the opening and closing points actually are, but somewhere around there. What crank and rotating assembly brand for stronger short block for the Twin Charge 5.3 stock will give out after a while? Yeah, it just depends on how hard you're doing stuff. But talk to the guys at BTR. They probably have, they might even have like their 388, like their short blocks that they use for racing that might be good for what you're doing if you're trying to do that. But I think that they're using, what are they, Dragon Slayer cranks or something like that. For me, for the Ford stuff, I would just get, if I was putting together a motor, which I have before, I would just pick the Summit Pro LS stuff. This one has the 1480E. Okay, your $125 transmission. That's good. That's good. Free the twins. That's right. Summit Racing. Most Pro LS rods are many months out on back order. They still are on back order? There's a lot of other good rods. Then I would pick the Bullet Series stuff from Carrillo is good. How much boost can a stock 2-bolt mains on a 400M handle? I know it's not called a 400M. It's a 400. Yeah, I will always call it a 400M. I don't know that the mains are the problem. And they can't handle boost. They don't know what that is. They don't understand what pressure is. The question would be how much cylinder pressure can they handle? So are you putting 10 pounds of boost to a motor that makes 300 horsepower or 300 foot-pounds? Or are you putting one that already makes 500 or 600 foot-pounds? Because the resulting amount is going to be a lot harder on the mains. So I don't know what kind of power you're trying to make. We should always start there. And any question from now on is going to get a response that is, hey, tell me how much power you're trying to make. And then we'll talk about that. S480 T6, single turbo, a reasonable size for a 500 horsepower 383, 800 horsepower goal drag race application. I would pick something smaller for only 800 horsepower than an S480 T6. If you have lots of stall and everything that takes care of what's going to be inherently soft in that could work too. If I can come up with the extra money boost lines, yeah, that's good stuff. But I don't think I don't know that you're at a power level where that kind of thing's necessary. Running it at night, headlights are dimming. Oh, so you have no. Oh, so if the thing was just stationary and not driving anything, and you have a voltage problem, I could see that. Good evening. My 331 stroker heads cam intake plus on 3 turbo at 10 pounds suddenly started having white smoke come out of the catch can and exhaust. Smoke is white and does smell like oil. What I think is you probably blew a head gasket if it's white. Can't wait for the Trick Flow Box R to be back. Yeah, I'll have to ask Brian about that one, the guy from Summit. Do you have a budget build for a 5.3 with a GT45 turbo parts list if possible? I don't have any parts lists. I don't really do that. I have lots of videos up to show you, but you already have the parts that you need. I don't know. You got to, again, we'll go back to how much power do you want to make? One day I'll get the torque converter, but then I'll sneak off to the shop and build a turbo crossover. Okay. The 5.0, but not the 5.8 will be there soon. Okay. Yeah, Brett, it seems that's usually white smoke is that. Is the white smoke coming out the exhaust also, or is it just coming out the breather? Late to the party, but twins are the way to go. Well, it depends, as always. Ron, so you want 700 horsepower? So that's just a cam and springs and that turbo or a different turbo. That would be even better than that turbo. But yeah, if you go to richardholdenerperformance.com, get the low buck truck cam and spring package, that will work. You're going to need bigger injectors to go with that because you need injectors to feed that. I would get the thousands that are there. That'll be fine. That will give you room to make that and then more when you go to a different turbo. If you're ever going to go to a different turbo, also allow you to run E85. We have a pump there too. You could get the 525 plus Hellcat style pump for that. After that, you just need tuning. Breather and exhaust, thicken really comes out at 3,500 plus RPM. Yeah. Have you checked after it's cooled off? Have you checked the water in the radiator to see if you're losing water? Never go wrong with twins. One of these days, I will die into the truck with a 25-pound injectors to give you a reference point. Yeah, we already know what 25-pound injectors will do. What would be a better choice than an S480, 383, be lazy with that size? Yeah, with the T6 S480, it's going to be soft. Have you already gotten that turbo? Shadow Ops on the 5.7. Yeah, 25-pound injectors, and you have a cammed 5.7. You're already out of injector. The only thing that's helping you is that the brake specific fuel consumption of an LS is actually pretty good, and that's helping you. Yeah, because a 5.7 with a Truck Norris or a low buck truck or a Chupacabra with that kind of camshaft in there, a 5.7 is going to be way over 400 horsepower. It's going to be probably closer to 450, I think. Two ideas: OEM vacuum pump tests for horsepower. And is it true if you take off the cap of the fuel injectors, they flow better? A lot more can be driven this way. Yeah, decapping the injectors is a possibility, but it's not just taking the cap off. They actually have to be cut off. The metal plate has to be cut off. And then the problem is that when you do that, they don't all flow the same. And so you have to do a whole bunch of them and then match them up with an injector flow machine to be able to do that. And that is possible. But then you've also messed up the flow curve through the other part of the range, because you're very rarely are you running like static wide open, like what all the injector will do. You're going through some sort of slope that we call, and those can change also, which is why those decap injectors don't work all that well as a good set of injectors that are bigger. I want to use one of the Holley ECUs. Yes, I have used those a lot. The other one that you should look at if you're getting one is a Haltech Rebel. Tom, when's the next trip to West Tech? Pretty soon. Look for the LS3 injectors if you want similar, bigger injectors. Yeah, or the flex fuel ones. We're going to have those if Jimmy hasn't put those up already. We're going to have the flex fuel injectors that are, if somebody's doing an NA combination or a low boost turbo one, those are like 50-pound injectors. And so you can make pretty good power, and they're less expensive than the FIC stuff. Silver over cam 5.7 Hemi should make around 500 horsepower if a 5-liter Cardi makes over 400. Okay. Who's doing a 5.7 double overhead cam Hemi? And right now a Hemi is not limited in head flow right now. I'll bet you that the late model Hemi stuff flows as much as a Coyote head does. Now, one's a 2-valve and one's a 4-valve, so they're going to do it differently, but I bet for peak flow that they're really comparable. What can I reinforce an LQ4 block with Ford's 408 internals, machined 823 heads, and still keep a daily driver on twin boost and touch 2,000 wheel horsepower? You can't. It doesn't have the strength where it needs the strength, and there's nothing that you can do to it to enhance that. You need a different block for 2,000 wheel horsepower. That's definitely aftermarket block. Summer Racing Pro LS 5.3 rotating assemblies, Pro LS rotating assembly 3780. 3780 is a standard bore. Standard stroke is 3622. 58X, yes, if it's a Gen 4, it's a 58. If it's a Gen 3, then it's a 24. 6125 rod, that's normal. 2cc dome. Yeah, I would pick a flat top if I were doing it. 10.9 to 1, 61cc, 10.3 at 65. Valve fit rings, H bearings. Yeah, I would pick a flat top with a valve relief in it and not a dome. You don't want a dome piston. I'm thinking of an L59, 33 pounds or 50-pound units eventually. Yeah, that will work. What was the result of your knock sensor issue? I don't know yet. I haven't taken it apart. The stock 4th gen 6-liter 2500 has 50 pounds. You can use those. When are you testing a Ford V10? I don't know. It would be cool though. A 6098 rod isn't stock on a Gen 3 rod. Yeah, all of the factory rods are 6098. At least all the 5.3 stuff is. But 6125s are what most aftermarket things are. Upgrade to the Gen 4, that's fine. You should get an aluminum 5.3 if you're doing this vet head. Those are good. Because they're, lightweight and they're full of billet the aluminum goodness. I don't know that they're billet, but they are full of aluminy goodness. And they'll take a lot of power, as much as the iron ones. But that's the only aluminum block that will do that. And don't worry about static compression. Again, the turbos are going to do all of that. 100 pounds of aluminum versus iron. Yeah, if you're just measuring the block. Yep. Especially with the Z06 lightweight. Yep. You want to keep that lightweight. I've definitely seen the LS Big Bang. How many wide open throttle runs at 1,000 horsepower have you, or would you expect? I don't know how many we could have done. We were talking about doing that, just making run after run after run at 1,000 horsepower and seeing what would happen. I think we would have run out of fuel before the motor would get hurt, I think. But we had 70 pulls, I think, on each of them that are near 1,000 horsepower. So it wasn't those weren't one run things, because it took a long time to get up to power, especially on the early ones. I've heard that iron blocks are better than aluminum ones, all except the 5.3 aluminum. None of the other aluminum ones that do I use to make lots of power. I don't use an LS1, LS2, LS3, only the 5.3 aluminum ones. And we have, for the injector guys, Shadow Ops is talking about the different injectors. One thing on the truck stuff is they have different injector plugs than what a lot of aftermarket injectors are. And we have injectors with either injectors that plug in directly, or we have adapters for those. It's pretty not too hard though. Like to see a Big Bang durability test. Yeah, we just get tired of doing pulls at 1,000 horsepower though. Wow. And particularly when we had a lot of turbo that was there, because we had the twins on there. And so when we were loading it, it wasn't making a lot of boost and a lot of power. So it had to ramp up. Wall thickness 5.3 aluminum is superior next to the LS3, LS2, LS2. No, the LS2, LS3 blocks and the LS1 blocks do not consider those. Those are not good. The 5.3 aluminum block is the best one. That one guys are making lots of power out of. Did you ever test boost plates where half is blocked off? One side of a T4 turbo inlet is blocked off and opens under RPM actuators. You mean you're talking about a what the heck are those called? Quick spool valves are what those called. I haven't ever run one on the engine dyno. What does CO2 do for turbo lag? It doesn't do anything. It doesn't change the functionality of the turbo. All it does is hold the wastegate closed. And if the wastegate was being closed anyway, so it wouldn't change it at all. But what does happen is the back pressure can want to push open the gate. And so the CO2 to the top of it, or just running boost to the top of it and to the bottom, like it happens with every, 3-port or 4-port controller. Sometimes these guys want a lot of dynamic range. So they put a very light spring in there, and then they run a lot of boost, and then they'll have quite a bit of back pressure. And so they have to have extra pressure holding the gate closed. But that doesn't do anything for turbo response. Like, it doesn't change what the turbo does relative to the NA power output. All it does is make sure that there's not a leak anywhere. Any plans to run 243 or other heads on your LQ4 series? Yeah, we had 799s there, which we wanted to put on. But the motor came with 317, but we wanted to try those. We were just running them on the 5.3. Do you recommend sleeving LS3 or go LSA? I got an LS3 for 500. I don't know why you're doing the difference between those two things. An LS3 that you sleeve, you could make much bigger, which you can't do with an LSA. So I don't know what the comparison is of those two. I wouldn't try to make lots of power with either one of those blocks. From a cost standpoint, I saw your video on budget turbo build and was wondering about what the cost is to build one like that. I don't remember what the total cost is. It depends on what you can do yourself. It depends on how much you can build. Like, can you build the Y pipe? Can you build the down pipe? Can you do all that? I've never owned a Gen 453. Are the costs much higher to modify over a Gen 3 with the DoD problems? They all don't have DoD. We're still thinking about putting M90 back on your truck. Yeah, I'd like to test it again. Like a 2011 2500 HD is what I'd look at for the injectors. Yeah, if you can find, if you have wrecking yards where they have specific things like that, like I can never find that in our wrecking yards. I'm talking about wastegates and other add-ons. Yeah, I don't have price lists on all that stuff. You could do it very, very cheap if you bought very, very cheap stuff, but I just don't know how much that's all going to be now, particularly because since I did that video, the prices have gone up. What would the markings be on aluminum 5.3? Well, it's easy to see that it's an aluminum block and it says 5.3. The aluminum 5.3 is also going to have 799 or 243 heads on it. So if you look at the head casting, it'll say that. You can also look at the VIN number on there. And then if you look up online, it will tell you what year they are and then what VIN letter designation correlates to that motor. BTR heads are coming, testing soon. Can you not ask for the heads sooner for advertising purposes because you know each other? He offered to send them to me a long time ago. He offered to send me the one set that was made, their pre-production piece that they used for testing. But I didn't. We didn't do it. I actually sent him my heads. I sent him those 220 as cast, no longer as cast because they ended up porting them. I sent them back to BTR so they could compare their heads to those heads. Do you like turbos? Yes, very much so. You answered this earlier. I'd like to share with others. I've got Australian 2V closed chamber heads, Edelbrock dual plane, forged pistons, whatever those are. On a 400M. So you want to know what the horsepower is? You need to always include the duration at 50. The advertised duration tells people very, very little. Lift tells us almost nothing. I'm thinking, I think I looked back at my 400 stuff. I'm still thinking it's in the low to mid 400s. Drop Nutella on my screen. Uh-oh. LS6, 224, 230, Patriot stage 3 heads, 500 wheel horsepower. I don't think so. Maybe with a manual transmission. I don't think that's not a 600 horsepower combination. Just don't buy an LS4 or 5.3 so you don't try and put that in a truck. Yeah, that's turned the other way, so it's pretty easy to recognize those. You have any decent FE heads in your stash of goodies? I don't. I have never even run an FE motor. Do you have any recommendations for a brand of wastegate and blow-off valves? I like the TurboSmart stuff, but it's not cheap. I think that the VS Racing stuff seems to do a pretty good job if you listen to Matt over at Sloppy. Do I like T3, T4 turbos? Is that what you're asking? I believe HP tuners can turn off DoD functions. They can do it, but I don't know if that does everything. I think most people want to plug those. The Aussie heads for $150. Yeah, that's pretty good for a closed chamber Aussie heads. You don't see those a lot. Mercury Marine took and designed a double overhead cam for Chevy LS. Never knew that. Yeah, they have a really cool Marine versions that are big. What's the highest pressure on piston to head that can be run safely on the streets? 12-1 turbo application. You can add. You want to know what the highest static compression you can run with the turbo motor? It just depends on octane. And I don't know why you would want to do that, because it really narrows your tuning window and you get little to no benefit from running high compression. You raced Fox body before in a road race. Yeah, that's underselling it a little bit, but yeah. I think, have you thought about doing a drag and drive with a similar car and an LS turbo deal? What I would want to go do is I would like to, I am putting an LS in it. We're putting an aluminum 5.3 in there, and we are going to run a turbo on it. I would like to take it back to the Silver State, which I did 12 times, and I would run it NA in the Silver State. I wouldn't run it as a turbo motor, because I don't need to go, 220 miles an hour or something in that Fox body. But I would take it. I'd take an NA one, because I have a T56 that I bought for it, and that's out at Jimmy's right now. And I want to do that. We might also do some. It's not set up to do a drag and drive thing. It's not set up as a drag race car. It's set up as a road race car. But what I'd like to do maybe are some half mile stuff maybe with it. That I would do with the turbo. I recall there was water injection in airplanes back in World War II. Yeah, that should say I recall. Yeah, they back in the piston engine era for World War II, they did extensive research on basically everything that was piston engined, because they were trying to, fight a war and make the planes work and have them make lots of power and have them last and save our people. I had to replace a header on a supercharged Mercury big block Chevy, and it was like $4,500 for one header. Wow. I was asking if you like turbo T3 and T4. So you're asking if I like T3, T4 hybrids for what application? So the universal thing for liking a turbo is like, does it work for the application that I'm trying to run on? I've run lots of T3, T4 hybrid stuff on Hondas back in the day, and also other small motors. We've got 2 minutes left, and we never had a poll, and that's why I did this, so that we could have a poll. I'll have to make sure we have one next time. Shane, I just don't understand what your question is. So LS4 for $500 is a good deal. You don't want an LS4. An LS4 is a front wheel drive one. That's not going to work. There's a lot of things that are different about that motor that make it not work for what you're doing. You want an L33, an LC9, an LH6, all of those things. I have an LH, I think it's an L8. I have an LH6 going together right now that has forged stuff on it. Out of the cycle engine. If I get this money coming up, I'm going to swap my K24 into my Civic, but I'll have an empty Honda shell. My neighbor has a 5-liter HO Fox with a rotted out convertible top. Should drop that in the Accord or an aluminum LS. LS4 is good for a Fiero. Yep, that could work. Although I would rather have, I don't know, I just have been longing for the supercharged V6. I would have a turbo one, but a supercharged V6 in the Fiero. I'm finding empty core aluminum 5.3s for 500 and up. I don't know. You mean empty cores, or you just mean blocks? K24 Fiero. That's also good. How much does a 485 through weigh than a K24? I don't know. I don't know what the aluminum stuff is. Should do some holder sign parts in the store. What would you want me to sign though? I have books that I could sell that I could sign those. That would be like a real thing. Yeah, shadow ops. No, I know I know what the different cycle engines are. I'm just talking about the fact that these are the my discussion was about piston engine uh aviation motors for these things for World War II. And that was basically the pinnacle of piston engine development before they said, hey, it worked really good? Our jets. One of the Discovery shows do a car with two LS4s in it. Yeah. Yeah, that was Tony Angelo and Lucky, I think, did that for Hot Rod Garage. LS6 224 cam, stage 3 heads. What kind of power do you think? I don't know. I can look at some of the testing that I did on the 5.7 stuff. +1 Elbrock head, Elbrock intake. So we did an LS1 with a bigger cam than that, a 231, 239, an Elbrock ProFlow intake manifold. It had mast heads on it, 1 7/8 headers, and it made 550. If that gives you an idea. MR2 would be good for a K24. I'd like to put a K24 in an Omni and a K24 and a 6-speed in an Omni. Back in the 90s, Edelbrock used to sell water. No, water injection works. It will provide cooling and it will help reduce detonation. The problem is you can't get it evenly to all the cylinders. That's the problem. But it's still used. Water injection or water methanol injection still works. Intercooling works better, but you can still use that. But it's not the cure to running massively high compression on pump gas. That's not a good choice. What you should do is if you're trying to do that, like guys that are racing, especially class racing, they're combining really high static compression with boost, but they're doing it with really high octane, usually methanol, but at least E85 or even race gas they're doing that with because they're limited in what they can do. And so they're trying to make as much power as they can. On a street motor, you're not trying to do that. And so that's why if you have 1,000 horsepower turbo, it doesn't matter whether you have 9-to-1 or 10-to-1 or 12-to-1, it's going to make 1,000 horsepower. Have you looked at the Porsche's new 6-cylinder engine patent? I don't think I have. Have to get the heavy loads off the aircraft. I like the Jato rockets. Jet assisted takeoff. I think the supercharged V12 Merlin engine. Yeah, those are good. Are you going to build a DIY blow-through carburetor? The MR2 is better options with swap kits. Those engines for Fieros make more sense. What about port water injection with each runner having a dedicated nozzle? That's what I wanted to do after David and I tested that water injection for, we just tested a kit, but that's what I wanted to do is the next thing is just put, if we had a small enough nozzle that we could use in each one, because it was easy to drill and tap the plastic manifold. That was nothing. Your race team's adding a K24 to a 92 MR2. I'm late. Twins are better. Yes, they are. Why not a 4G63 swap in an Omni? Also good, but not nearly as much power as a K24. Acid etch anodize, something you would put your name on the turbo valve cover. Why not? They're all doing it. I'll buy it. I don't think my name is the same as what other people are doing. Shane, I still don't know what question you're asking. Have you ever heard of guys getting real crazy and using 100% ethanol type and then cutting it with nitromethane instead of just water or meth? Yeah, you would need to add, if you're going to add nitromethane, it has to be with an alcohol-based fuel. It can't be with gas, because they don't mix very well. And so if you're running methanol, you could add nitromethane to it. My name carries the weight. I don't think that's true. I'm building a BMW R18B motorcycle with twin roots blowers. Okay. Trying to determine if it will have an issue with detonation. It will, but you adjust that with timing and cooling and octane. Porsche's 3D printed pistons are amazing. I'll be running 93 octane, air to air, twin intercoolers, 9:6:1. Okay, that'll help. That'll be good. All of that should work. Looking for a towing motor for my Suburban. I was thinking about a 502 or 486, which would be better choice. I don't think there's a bad choice with either one of those. What would cause 13 to 14 psi in a billet K24 block? What do you mean? What would cause it? A turbo? Shane, what is it you want me to look up? There's literally 100 different T3, T4 turbos that are available. So what is it you want me to look up? I honestly don't understand what you're asking. There are lots of different size T3 and T4 hybrid turbos that you can buy. So you would want them for many, many different things. I don't know what your motor is. I don't know what kind of power you're trying to make. I don't know what size your T3 side and your T4 side of the turbo are. I don't know any of that. I need to have more information. I watched a lot of your videos. Bought my 6-liter iron today. Got to build it, put it into Firebird. There you go. Oh, in the crankcase. Oh, okay. Blow by? On that setup, stock engine with 10 psi, it'd be too much. What I would do is start out much lower than that and then get everything dialed in and then try raising the boost. I have not heard of LPC headers specifically. No DIY carburetor tuning for home blow-through carb turbos. I will donate. Yeah, I haven't ever done that. Yeah, JJ, I would just start low and see what happens. I don't know what your minimum is. But when we do it, we start out with no boost. We run it naturally aspirated and make it work. And then we take all the timing out of it in the above 100%, 100 kPa going into the boost zone. We take all the timing out of it and then start dialing in the air fuel. And then we add timing just to make sure that it's okay. We also have good water going through the intercooler and all that stuff. Do twin turbos offer lower intake air temps? No. Obviously, twins offer way less back pressure. It may not. You don't know, because if you have all of the exhaust feeding one big turbo that makes the same power as the two smaller turbos, the back pressure could be comparable. along with quicker spool due to less rotating mass, but you're only providing it half of the exhaust energy again. So you could have exactly the same response rate. Porsche 6-cylinder patent is cool. Two power strokes in the 6-stroke cycle, but will face similar challenges as 2 strokes. I'll have to take a look at that. That sounds cool. What was the bad news about the GT45 turbo? There's no bad news. It still does what it's always done. Heard of people putting oil and water injection to lubricate things like having mercury and gas. 243 versus 799. No, you don't need sodium-filled valves. And not all 243s have sodium-filled valves anyway. Only the ones that came on the LS6. Okay, so then are twins better? Again, it depends on what you're trying to do. Had major issues at the World Cup with the billet block and had to go with a stock block. So are you talking about the Boosted Boys thing? They know what they're doing. They know more about that than I do. They've done way more really high boost stuff than I am. I've done a handful of K-series stuff and nothing anywhere near the, I don't know, 50 or 100 PSI that they're probably running. How do you feel about electric fans on air-to-air intercoolers running at low speed? I think I would be worried about it hurting flow at higher speeds. And at lower speeds, you're probably not asking the thing to cool very much. LPC headers. Is it Lingenfelter? They cracked a valve cover. They cracked a valve cover because of too much pressure in the setup. The thing that normally puts pressure in the crankcase is allowing some of the combustion to go where it doesn't belong. So if you break a piston or a ring or something like that, and some of the compression when the piston's coming up, the compression or during the expansion is going past the piston and into the crankcase. That's not good. 243 best flow due to chamber valve size, correct? They have, of all of the factory cathedral port heads, a 243 and a 799 and a 317 really all kind of flow the same. Again, you don't care about that because the turbos are going to decide what the power is. But I would think that you would be wanting to put a better head on there anyway, because the downside of any of the factory cathedral port heads is they have thin decks. So an aftermarket head, like an airflow research head or a trick flow head or something like that, has a thicker deck surface, so it seals better. And also all of those heads will flow way more than any stock cathedral port head does. Now, ported versions of those heads flow really well. You can get those to flow way over 300 CFM. Nathan, the discussion about twins was a long, involved 10 or 15 minute thing on what happens when we choose twins, or why we would choose twins, or why we would not choose twins. And it's not a simple thing where one is better than the other. Shane, I still understand it's a turbo, and now I understand the size. What are you trying to do with it? Vortec heads work well enough on a D-stroke 400 small block. Yeah, a Vortec head is like a 400 or 425 horsepower cylinder head for an NA thing. I watched some of your 454 videos, and I've heard a 454 can make 600 horsepower with just heads, cam, and intake. What's the best head cam combo to put on mine? I'm bored 30 over as well, and I'm not impressed yet. You an airflow research head I would think would be the best ones that you could put on there. To make 600 out of a 454, you're also going to need some compression to make that work. So if you have a stock bottom end that has a flat top piston, it's going to be pretty difficult. And it's going to take a pretty big camshaft. I'm trying to put it in a 36 Chevy truck. And what is the motor, Shane? And how much power are you trying to make? And are you running 2 of those? Nitrous testing with different fuels. Well, what do you think is going to happen with different fuels? If you add 100 horsepower with a nitrous, it's going to add 100 horsepower. So the fuel would just be whatever the fuel change is going to be to the NA motor. And we probably wouldn't do that with 87 octane. So that's not going to work very well. Although we have run nitrous on 87. It's not great, but because you have to worry about detonation. It's better to do that on motors that we don't really care about, like junkyard motors. It was late today, but I like one right-size turbo to get me to 1,000 horsepower on a 408 small block. Yep, that's easy peasy. On a side note, I have a cast iron Gen 4 5.3 with 317 heads. AFR and stage 3 cam, you think, with high compression, or will a nice stage 2 work? I don't think either one of those will work to get to 600 horsepower. I heard David Freiberger rattle off a 600 horsepower 454 build on a live feed once. It was a well-priced cam heads and springs combo. $400 small block 2-bolt main. How much power NA would you go for before breaking the block? I don't. Are you trying to do a, like for a 400 small block, are you trying to do like a sprint car motor or something? Like how much power are you talking about? Nathan, I don't know the answer to your question on that size turbo. I don't know what motor it's on. I would think that the difference would be less as we go bigger in motor and would be more as we go smaller. But I don't know. And I honestly don't know how to actually measure that is really, really difficult. If you are only talking about 200 or even 300 RPM change in spool, that's really hard to determine. We are going to do some AR testing coming up, and we're also doing some V-band versus T4 testing coming up, which should be good. So you're trying to make 750 with a 400. So you need 2 of those then? I don't know that you'd even be able to measure that, Nathan. Down to aluminum ones near me, running low miles, under 1,000 while we talked. Okay. Do you have any more other guys' engines? Yeah, I still need to run the Pontiac Trophy 4-cylinder. Shane, with one of those turbos, you're not going to make 750 since it's a 400 horsepower turbo. You're going to need 2 of those. But I wouldn't pick those turbos. You should pick a turbo that we recommend. If you want to make 750, I would pick like that GT45, or we're going to have more turbos coming out in the next 2 or 3 weeks that will easily do that and have much better response rate. And if you wanted to go more than that, there are other turbos, so you'll be much better off. Those turbos that you're talking about, I've never heard of, and I don't know that I would pick those. And all those turbos I was looking at, they're all internally wastegated too, which is you're going to have problems with boost control if you're doing that on anything but a really small motor. And on that note, since I've been here an hour and 20 minutes, 25 minutes. It is time to go, but I will see you guys all tomorrow.